I would like to call to order the regular Guthrie Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, March 12th, 2020. And could we begin with roll call?
Sure. Abe Gassenport.
Here.
Don McBride.
Here.
Jill Oakstotz.
Here.
Chris Bryant.
Here.
And Joe's not here yet or absent, but we still have a quorum.
Okay. Our next item is public comments. Is anyone here who wishes to speak on any general item related to the Planning Commission that is not on the agenda? Anyone? Okay. Move on to our next item, which is approval of previous minutes from the December 12th, 2020 or 2019 meeting.
And actually, without Joe here, we'll probably table that because we only have one person that was here at that meeting, which was Abe and would be Joe.
Okay.
Since,
If he shows up, do we come back to it?
yeah, we can go back to
Okay.
that, yeah.
All right, our next item is item 4, PC application 20-001, discussion and potential action on a request to repeal all sections of Chapter 4, Building, Plumbing, Electricity, Article 22, Building Design Standards, and moving all regulations to Article 5, Section 6, Architectural Design of Accessory Buildings and Fences within the Guthrie Zoning Code, and amending Article 5, Section 6 of the Guthrie Zoning Code to read Architectural Design Standards, Accessory Buildings and Fences, and consider amendments to residential, commercial, and industrial architectural design standards, accessory buildings, and fences. Can we have our staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll kind of start off in general because there's a few things here, and then I'll try to hit the high points. You had a pretty elaborate staff report, so I won't go through that because I don't think even the audience really cares to hear all the nuts and bolts of that. But one of the things that I just want to have in general is I have developed a updated zoning code, an entire draft zoning code, basically top to bottom to what I would consider bring it up to date. Most of our zoning code goes back to at best the 90s. A lot of it is still from the 80s and probably even into the 70s. Some of it still holds fine till this day, but there's a lot of stuff that obviously through changes in the city and general society that sometimes are more of a prohibitive to the average person than not. And so the first element really is tonight. This was also an area where the city council had also indicated they wanted to review the architectural design standards, especially on the commercial end of things. It just so happens that the existing architectural design standards as well as our accessory structures and fences are all under one code. In the beginning, you can kind of see what I'm hoping to have in the end is we also have a lot of codes that sit out there amongst themselves that are traditionally in a zoning code. Landscaping, signs, accessory structures, all basically are separate little sections of the municipal code. Those are traditionally all part of the zoning code. And so that was what it was kind of talking about as the repealing part in that. It's basically taking it from a general part of the municipal code and putting it into the zoning code where it traditionally should lie. And then obviously with that, there's going to be some amendments. So that's the basis. And so down the road, either the rest of the code as a whole or possibly different areas of it, I'll be bringing back for discussion and approval. And again, hopefully in the end, we will have a zoning code that is going to be good for the city and again, allowing people to be able to enjoy their properties, but also have conditions in there that we can ensure that we as a community are going to get what we desire and to some extent prevent what we don't want type of thing in that. So having said that, I broke it down into 3 areas: residential design standards, commercial and industrial design standards, accessory buildings, and fences. And again, I'll kind of give a synopsis of the each one of them. But before I do that, I was also going to just go over, and I put it in my staff report, kind of one of the basic scenarios that we're dealing with on an everyday basis in the planning department. because we again have codes that not only exist in different areas of the municipal code, but they're very conflicting in what they require. And so, for instance, one of the things that our code currently requires is a 2-stall garage. So if you build a new house, you have to have a 2-stall garage. Well, our accessory structure says, well, if you're building a detached garage, you're limited to a certain square footage, and possibly that could be an issue given the lot coverage. And so one of the typical scenarios we run into is one code says you have to have a 2-stall garage, and the other code says you can't build that because it's too big given the size of house or the size of property you have in that. And then the other element is just in general, sometimes the lot coverage comes in. So again, we have all these different aspects that are at play, but for the most part, they're all contradictory. And so again, in some of the amendments that are being proposed, we're hoping to, again, take care of a lot of those issues to where we can get the desired development we need without, again, infringing too much on the, if you want to say, property rights of an individual property. So having said that, I'll go right into the architectural design standards. Currently, as I said, probably the biggest change is going to be going away from a mandatory 2-stall garage to a 1-stall garage. Even our zoning code only requires 1 parking space for a property, but yet our design standards say you have to have 2. In most codes in that, and I think in our community, 1 is more than appropriate. We actually have some properties that don't even have garages at all in that, because that's how the community was developed. So staff would say that it would be, probably prudent to have at least 1, because everybody has at least lawnmowers and other stuff they need to put somewhere, so we don't have it out and about. But 2 may be a little excessive because it does add to the cost of development. And again, when we're going back and looking at lot coverage and a lot of other stuff, it has also caused issue on the size of houses that people wanted to put in, and again, exceeding lot coverages and that type of thing. So we would be proposing to change that from a mandatory 2-stall garage to a 1-stall. Most of the rest of the general residential standards are very similar to what we have now. I just kind of shored up the wording. Still require, a brick, stone, wood type finish and that, or a wood simulated finish. That wouldn't be any different than what we have been requiring. There was some of the screening requirements that staff feels were not necessarily appropriate. They would be what I would call more of homeowners association requirements, not requirements that generally would be conducive to the overall community. In that there was a lot of restrictions on skylights, on solar, and a lot of other stuff that we have residents who want to maybe utilize solar and even have it on the roof, but by our current standards, basically it was prohibited because it could not meet the standards. So I looked at that and kind of took some of that out of there because, again, it seemed very restrictive. The other big difference or that is creating a new overlay district, and we have called it the Guthrie Proper Overlay, and you'll see it coming up on the screen, not that one, but it'll be the next one, Aaron, if you have right there. All the area in blue would be a new overlay district, and what it's trying to accomplish is we have our historic district, which takes care of any homes or even buildings within those areas and gives protection to our older homes that are of, typical Victorian, colonial, bungalow type style homes. But the rest of our city has no protection, in essence, of those homes to remain. So if there's a vacant lot or even one burns down, somebody can come in and build a very basic type home that may not necessarily be compatible with the area. So what the overlay district would be doing is requiring that in those areas it be maintained, or even if you are doing new construction, that it would be a bungalow, Victorian, colonial type home and be compatible with that neighborhood. So that's an area then we can, again, kind of keep that element that makes Guthrie Guthrie. Much like our downtown with the buildings, again, we have a lot of diverse homes and a lot of very unique homes that we want to protect and keep keep. So with that, there was some basic requirements, what I would call like a form-based code, where it had enough to ensure we would get that type of style, but not be too specific to where it would prevent somebody from having their own unique design or even a little leverage in design of their home. And you will notice that I also, or we put in there to even have pictures so it was clear what we're trying to achieve in that area. So that's that element of there. And again, that would be the new element of the code. And with that also, oh, sorry, I thought it was the, again, mainly protect areas that we have, which I think is important, and there's a lot of people in the community that I talk to feel the same way. So finally, we get to the commercial, industrial, architectural design standards. Again, a good portion of those are going to be similar to what we had. There's some new elements in there that, once again, would, I think, would make sure we get what we're looking or wanting in the community. More recently, there's been a desire to try to get buildings to be more brick or accommodate more brick in that, and even some architectural design to it. So a good portion of the proposed code would go towards adding the some more architectural requirements and more importantly, a mandatory portion of brick. The proposed amendment would be at least 60% of each facade of a building would have to be brick. And then the rest could be incorporated with stone, or it could even be with some of the what's considered the EIFS products or that type of thing as accents and that type of building in that. But again, it would have a mandatory brick. It also reduced the ability for the amount of metal that could be used. Currently, our code allows up to, I think, 60% metal. If I remember, it's 40 or 60, I forget offhand. This would basically limit it to no more than 10%, which would basically, or again, make it to where it would be more of an accent type use. It wouldn't be, you know, a full siding or anything that could be substantial metal. And then finally, the other part of it goes into the architectural requirements. Probably the best example I can give you, and I'm not trying to, you know, create issue with this, but one of the things that I think we need to look at when there's buildings is, again, the appearance from all sides of a building. If you look at the new Express Wellness that was done per our current code, that's pretty much what you get, where the front aspect of it is fairly decent or gives you some, but the rest of it is kind of forgotten. And if you look on the south side of that building, it's a flat facade, which really has no architectural element to it. It's just kind of flat. I'm not so certain that that's the type of buildings that we really want to have in our community. It should look at all facades and have some architectural elements, even simple bump outs with the sides, and that adds so much more value versus just, again, a flat facade. So again, the proposed code would add to that and add those requirements. There was also, if you looked in there for screening and even areas of loading, unloading when it's adjacent to a residential area. So if you have the back part of the building and there's residential area there, there's more consideration for protecting that residential area from whether it's vehicular traffic, from the aesthetics, or all the above. So again, it kind of shored that area up, so we have some protection back there. One of the things that I did not change a lot, and again, this is really up to the commission and even anybody in the community that wants to weigh in, is that in the industrial area, it would still allow all metal buildings. Which currently is there. And I'll be honest, that could go either way. I mean, if you guys desire to have better standards for the industrial area, that's not an issue. However, one of the things that I did put in there to make sure, again, that we're consistent with the building design, and a lot of the elements of the other stuff is, if you have an industrial property that's within one of the overlays that was created for the accessory buildings, you would have to meet the standards of the commercial building. because we do have some industrial zone properties that are along Division or next to, again, these commercial areas that have one standard, and it really wouldn't make any sense to have those with brick and architectural and next to it an all-metal building. So it basically says if you're in that overlay and you're along the street, you have to meet the same requirements as a commercial building. If you're just basically in the middle of a residential area, or industrial area, and you aren't along the street in that, then you can still have all metal, or you don't have to have the architectural aspects of it. So that's a kind of a full, I guess, synopsis of the design standards and some of the key areas that are proposed for change in that. Hey, Joe.
Hey, I was looking at the clock on my oven, and it was an hour.
That's all right. Glad you could still make it. I was, you know.
I texted you.
Oh, did you? Oh, I did get a text. Sorry, I wasn't looking at that. But anyway, we were just going over to commercial and residential and architectural design standards.
Okay.
Now on to accessory buildings. As I indicated in my introduction, you know, this is one of those where I understand this ordinance hasn't been in place all that long. And I will say that any ordinance that is put forth in that, you can never truly understand what all of the aspects or impacts it will be, good or bad, until you put it in place and have some real world scenarios to it. That's kind of happened with the accessory buildings ordinance that we have in place. Overall, it's not inherently a bad ordinance, and there's still a lot of good with it. But again, in some of the areas that we're having continual problems with is the way in which the structures are figured for size. Also, the other element of the code, even with that, gives a maximum square footage period for that, as well as a number to the amount of accessory structures you can have in that. And just a couple, or I'll basically try to go over to key areas that we propose for change. One of the things I will say is that is not being proposed as any changes is the architectural requirements. The architectural requirements, the areas that are metal versus non-metal, or that the overlays, none of that is changing. It's all in the how the size is determined, the number you can have, and in that area. So again, I just want to say that that part of it for the, because again, even staff would say, if we're going to require a certain standard for a home, I don't think it is wrong or bad to also require a similar standard for the accessory structures in that. But again, there's a couple elements we get in there, because as we get out into the larger properties in that, you know, this is where some of the size and other elements have come into play and have caused some issues. One of the things that the current code does is it says that any accessory structure, or it gives a total square footage for accessory structures on a property, and it's based either on lot size or 50% of the principal structure square footage. But even then, it goes to say that if the principal structure is 2-story, you can only use the ground floor story to figure out the maximum square footage. And as I said in my original introduction, to some extent, you're being penalized for a 2-story home. When it comes to taxes, assessments, whatever, you know, even the value of your home, the 2-story, let's say it's 1,600 square feet, that's what it's figured on. But in our code, it says only the bottom floor, so maybe only 800 of that will apply. And again, especially in our older area, in and around where we're at here, with the smaller lots, that comes into play because it limits either the size of home that you can put on, or inability to put in a 2-stall garage because we exceed the square footage. And again, it's just some of those elements that I don't, you know, weren't necessarily, when they were put in there, were to be difficult. But again, we just have real world scenarios where we're like, okay, this has become an issue. So having said all that, what the amendment is proposing is to still use the 50% rule. So it's still an accessory structure cannot exceed 50% of the primary structure square footage. But again, it's left at that. Whether it's 2-story, 1-story, doesn't matter. So if you have 1,600 square feet, the most you can put is 800 square feet. It doesn't limit it as the total square footage for the property. The limitation will come on the number that is in there, or lot coverage, or all the above. I can tell you on the average 7,000 square foot lot that we have in this area, even with the 1-stall garage, it is still very difficult, or maybe not even possible, to put another accessory structure on there because of lot coverage. So in most cases, at best, they're going to have a house, a detached garage, and possibly one accessory structure. And I can tell you after that, that's it. As the lots get bigger, obviously the area which you can utilize or have accessory structures increases. And so by taking away some of the limitations on the other limitations, staff is still proposing a maximum number of accessory structures on a property regardless. One of the other things that was in there that seems unfair is, again, you're required to have, and again, per current code, a 2-stall garage, but it was also considered, if you detached it, it had to meet the accessory building requirements. So in some cases, again, you had a portion of the code that says you have to have a 2-stall garage, but because of that, now you can't have another small accessory structure. So we reworded it to say that a detached garage does not count towards the accessory buildings, and so you could have up to 3, a detached garage and 2 others, or in that. So again, you can have 2 beyond a detached garage. One of the other elements that is kind of an overriding thing in our community as a whole is we have quite a diversity in lot sizes, as most of you know. As we go south of town, you start to get to lots that are a minimum of 1 acre, some up to 5 acres, and everywhere in between. I think as a community, we need to have that recognition that a 1, 2, 3 acre lot does not function like a 7, 8, 9,000 square foot lot. And because of that, we need to have, if you want to say, different rules. And even if you look at our comprehensive plan, even as old as it is, it still recognizes that we have kind of that suburban or rural agricultural type uses versus 7,000 square foot lot uses in that. They're all single family, but they have all their own elements. And actually in the draft zoning code that I have that will be coming to you, I'm actually proposing to create new zoning districts to accommodate those larger lots, which would also possibly allow for animal privileges such as horses and that. Because again, a lot of the reason people buy large properties is, number one, they just don't want to be close to their neighbors, or have neighbors that close, honestly. Or they're looking to have the acreage to build, accessory structures for their hobbies or whatever. And in a lot of cases, some of them also want to have animals, larger animals, horses and whatnot. Per our current code, it's all zoned R1 and it's all regulated the same. And again, I don't think that that's, necessarily a good, value of land use in our community. But again, that's one of those things for down the road. But with the accessory structures, the difference would be is when you get to 1 acre, it would take away the basically the maximum size of structures. It would all come down to the number of accessory structures and lot coverage, or the combination of both. For 1 acre lots, it would be 3 structures beyond a detached garage, and that's it. But there would not be a maximum per se on the actual structures themselves. Because again, on larger lots, it's not uncommon to have even accessory structures the same size or greater. Obviously, this is, up for discussion, but again, the key point I want to make is I think we need to have some, again, recognition that the larger lots do not function like the smaller lots in that. The one other element that I wanted to add is even the 50% rule for any lot under 1 acre would be maxed out at 850 square feet. So even if you had a 4,000 square foot house on a lot, the maximum of any accessory structure would still be 850 square feet in that. It only goes 1 acre and more where you would, again, not have a limitation on size. But there are limitations even on the smaller lots in that. But again, I think between limiting the number and the lot coverages in that, I think we're still going to accomplish to not have properties that are going to have 8 or 9 little 100 square foot structures or massive structures in more of the dense areas, but again, allow for some of the larger properties to have a little bit more relief and understanding that they function differently. So again, all that I'm talking about is proposals. We have, the ability to discuss that and go from there. And again, the last thing I was going to say is the corridors that were established or the overlays that were established for the architectural are not proposing any changes whatsoever. The only thing I did is basically combined it for code purposes because the current ordinance had like the main corridor overlay district and standards and the Midtown overlay district and standards, and they said the exact same thing. So it just makes sense to put them all under, basically overlay districts, here's the standards. We don't need to necessarily be repetitive for each district separately. So it looks smaller, but in the end, it really isn't changing a lot of the stuff. And even elements like the part about the site plans and all of that in the current ordinance, that's all in other aspects of the code. And so again, you still need building permits, you still need to be building codes, you need to meet setbacks, all that stuff. It's just contained in other parts of our code and didn't necessarily need to be with the accessory. Because again, even the element of where an accessory structure cannot be forward of the front of a house and all that, that still exists. Even in the residential design standards, it says that you cannot have a garage that is further forward of the house. So all of that remains. Finally, and I'm sorry being long-winded, but there's a lot of information here, is fences. Once again, we had a couple of spots. We had fence requirements in our zoning code, and we had fence requirements in our residential design standards. Basically, we're trying to put it all into the zoning code in that. The biggest area, or really the biggest change with that really is the potential of allowance of chain link. I understand there's been a long desire not to have chain link fencing in the community. If anybody's been around the community, they know it exists. Obviously, since the ordinances have been in place, if somebody calls, we tell them they can't have it. Obviously, it isn't necessarily always known because a fence does not require a building permit. And so sometimes fences do go up that we are not aware of. If we can verify that they've been built under the current codes in that, then code enforcement takes care of some of those issues. But one of the things that when we're looking at the code was, I guess, a potential compromise was the fact of the allowance of chain link, but only in the rear yard. I do understand the aesthetic value that wants to be upheld in the fronts of properties and that to where we want, not only a quality type fence, if you want to say, but also limit the height and all of that. So again, we don't have walled in properties. That's understood. But I think that's why, in a backyard, it probably makes more sense because that's where a lot of people not only have pets, but, family and other stuff. So, that's not something that's always easily viewable from, the streets and other stuff. So the aesthetics is not quite there. So again, that would be the biggest change. The one other addition that I had is previously at the Planning Commission, we had discussion on it was basically wire welded fence that had like wood posts in that, and the commission had said or determined that that was acceptable. So that was added, and the way I had put it is that it could only, that the welded wire, woven wire type stuff could only be used when it was incorporated with wood, masonry, masonry or brick type posts or supports. So again, you can't have a metal post and have that. It has to have a little bit better architectural or aesthetic value. But again, it would follow what the commission had previously determined to be appropriate. And then the rest of it pretty much has been in the code. You know, you can still have masonry walls, wood, vinyl, brick, ornamental wrought iron type stuff. So again, the biggest change would be some allowance of that. The other change really is to when we have fences in the front yard. What I always say is, you know, your typical picket fence, in that, you know, it's limited to 4 feet in height, which is not going to be changed. But our current code says that the opacity of that cannot exceed 30%. Well, generally, most of the ones that put the picket fence in are pretty much at 50% because they have a slat, an area that is equal to a slat that's not there, the slat and all that. So that's why we're removing that to 50%, because most of the, like I said, fences that are put up are done in that manner. If the commission doesn't feel that's appropriate and wants to keep the 30%, that's not a huge thing. Because again, going back, we're not proposing to change the height or the type of fence that would be in along the front yards or even on a side street. It would be the allowance in the rear yard in that. So having said all that fun, long-winded stuff and trying to give some synopsis of what we're looking at, I know it's a lot to take in that, and that was why, again, I'm trying to probably take portions of the code to bring you guys versus the overall code, you know, whole code itself. Because in a lot of ways, I'm hoping we can get it talked about and hashed out in meetings rather than having, you know, 4, 5, 6 workshops, whatever, on a whole code. We can kind of break it down. There's obviously public here, so, you know, if you guys have questions for me, obviously, go ahead. But then, you know, we have some of the public to be able to speak.
Okay. Are there any questions from the commission before we get comments from the public? Questions, not discussion yet. Okay. Well, if anyone is here to speak on this agenda item, you can go one at a time, and if you will come up to the podium and introduce yourselves. Is anyone here to speak? Or are you just here to get information? Go right ahead. Tell us your name and address for the record.
My name's Kelly Watson, and I live at 6217 South Center Road, so out by the lake. And I'd like to speak on the accessory structure one because I myself have 5 acres out there. I bought the place, it already had an accessory structure on there. Had a carport, which had no idea would actually be considered an accessory structure. So I like to build cars, restore them. And so I've actually outgrown the shop that I have, and I have vehicles sitting outside. Son's baking the paint off of them, clear coat. So I'm wanting to build a 2,400 square foot shop, over 400 foot off the roadway. Nobody's ever going to see it. And I can't with the current code because I can't have more than 2, and it's going to exceed the square footage. But me being on the 5 acre lot, like Mr. Casca said, it's really restrictive to me. And so I did come up here to follow policy, and we actually went in front of the variance to try to get a variance to do that. And they had a quorum, and it was 3 and 1 abstained from voting, which canceled it out. So, and I don't understand why in that situation it wouldn't be majority ruled. If somebody abstained, it would go towards majority. But what she explained to me was that she didn't want it to block her view. That was her reasoning for giving the vote, and that there is a place in the neighborhood where she lived that they built it, and she called it a white elephant. And this is never going to be within her view. And I think she has prejudice against it because maybe there was one that got built, and she can't see past that. And this is going to be an engineered building. It guarantees 50 years on the metal and the paint. It's not something that's going to get thrown together and pieced. It's not going to be patchwork. It's not going to have 3 or 4 different colors of metal on there. It's going to be done right. And so I'm asking you guys, you know, to look into this, to change that to where I can protect my investments that I have out there and get everything under cover. not only would that help me, but she wouldn't have to look at all my cars and stuff sitting out there, as they'd be back in the back. And so that's what I'd like to ask you about. And I brought all these people with me that are also in support of that. And any of them would like to speak, and then I'd give them the opportunity. So if you guys have any questions for me at this time?
Any questions for him?
No, I was here when he was at the meeting.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Yeah, please come forward.
I was just gonna say, I live out there.
Oh, yeah, if you could come to the podium, please. Thank you, sir.
If you'll give us your name and
Yeah,
address
thank
for the
you.
record. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I lived right down the road from him, right around the corner from Sue. And she just has a little spot. And like he says, where he's got it going in, you won't be able to see it from the road. Sue can't see it. And I don't think that it would block anyone's view unless they were actually on his property, because it's woods all the way around, and there's woods between it and the road.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to speak as well. Kelly and my father-in-law, Elton.
If you can come up to
Yeah,
the
if you could,
podium.
yeah, thank you.
Name
That's
and
okay.
address.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Latham, and this is my father-in-law, Elton Fillmore, and we were both Kelly's neighbors. The shop that he wants to build is directly behind a home that I own at 220 Lakewood. And I don't have any objection to it at all, and I think that you should make some variations or something that would allow him to do the shop. He's correct on that. We wouldn't see his cars, and his shop would be a nice shop. So I would support that as well.
Name and address for the record, please.
Jim Reeser at 6119 South Sooner Road. My property abuts to Kelly's on the north side. And even being that close to this property, I wouldn't be able to see his outbuilding either. I mean, I'll know it's there, that's gonna be our new hangout spot, but still, I live right next door and you can't see it, so.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yep. Name and address, please.
I'm Bonnie Terrell, and I live at 809 Lakewood, and I'm within walking distance of Kelly. I have no objection. I think it would be great. I'd pass by there at least 2 or 3 times a day, and I don't have any objection to that, and I wouldn't be offended by it in any way.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
I was here last year.
I recognize you.
8 months.
Yeah.
My
Name
name's
and
Art
address.
Atkinson. I live at 213 Foster Road, and Kelly's a good neighbor of mine. And I drove the road today to check it, and there's probably a 50-foot rise between the house in question and where Kelly's gonna build his shop. And then there's 30-foot trees on top of that, so there's no way that it would ever block anybody's view. But anyway, I just want to speak in his behalf. And thanks again for letting me build my shop last year.
Anybody else? Okay, with that, do we have any comments from our planning commissioners?
Let me ask something. When I'm reading the maximum number and size of a residential accessory building, if you go down and it's more than 1 acre, from what I'm reading, it says there's no limitation on the size or floor area of an accessory building.
Correct. That's what the proposed amendment would have. The limitation, again, would come down to either lot coverage or a maximum number of accessory structures. And as I indicated, it would allow up to 3 beyond a garage on 1 acre or more properties. But there would not be a size limitation. It would be the size limitations, and that would apply for under an acre.
So Dan, if you mentioned that the size of the outbuildings, it cannot exceed 800 square footage.
That's for.
Yeah, that's for any property that is under an acre. There would be a maximum limitation
So
of
what is-
850 square feet.
What is
Yeah.
our limit on the acreage? What is do we have a limitation on the acreage?
Right now, there's different scenarios. There's limitations on the maximum square footage you can have either by acreage or by the size of your home. But what the code says is whichever is more limiting is the one that applies. In most all cases, the 50% rule is going to be more limiting. So right now, with the acreage layout we have, beyond probably 1,200 square feet, In most cases, you would have to have a 600,000 or a 6,000 square foot house in order to even get to the point of utilizing the 3,000 square feet you're allowed for like 5 acres. Because the 50% rule is basically always going to be the limiting factor in that.
But the question is, if you mention in there, as far as the people having acreages, they're gonna have large animals, and they wanna do things in there, and
Yeah, and that's what I was saying in general is, you know, from a land use standpoint, there's clearly a difference between, again, your typical more high-density, small lots versus your large acreages as you go. And in the south part of our community, most all the properties out there are the smallest are an acre. You even get in and around the lake and that area, most of those are an acre, some may be slightly under, but, you know, they're large properties. When you are in what I call, or is the Guthrie property, original subdivided area, that's where you have your 7,000 square foot lots and all that. And there definitely should be a distinction because, you know, again, on the smaller lots, you know, they do function differently from all standpoints of land use at the bigger one. So again, it was just recognizing that diversity that we have, and that, you know, unfortunately, because of that, you can't always have if you want to say a blanket ordinance or one ordinance to try to cover entire community when you have the diversity we have in the community from lot sizes. And you know, there's been people who say, well, that's the country, but yeah, it's still, you know, it is, but it's in the city limits. So again, you know, and as I go back, even our comprehensive plan has that recognition that we have in there, they call it, I think, more rural agriculture or suburban or whatever, but there's a recognition even in the comprehensive plan that large lots are likely to function differently than your typical high-density lots. But usually 1 acre is about that cutoff, because if you look at most zoning codes in that, those type of regulations are usually an acre and above. Under an acre, it falls into your typical, I guess, R1 or whatever in that. But 1 acre always seems to be that cutoff of when you make a transition of different rules.
It seems like part of the discussion when we drafted this ordinance before, or the standards, was aesthetics, and then some of it was environmental issues with impervious surface and runoff. I guess that would be less of a concern with larger acreages.
Yes.
But is it still a concern
Well,
if you had very large structures on the property?
Yeah, and that's also one of those elements where, you know, that's always going to be a concern no matter what, because anytime anybody builds on a property, commercial, residential, or otherwise, you know, there's drainage concerns, and through the permitting processes, that is reviewed and it's looked at and that. So, you know, there could be other elements like that, you know, a particular property owner's like, look, I don't even want to build now because I'm just going to have to do too much for grading or other, you know, that element's always going to be there, and it is always looked at in any building permitting process and that. So, you know, to some extent, I don't know if that's, I guess, an issue in that, because, you know, or I don't want to say consideration, but I can't think of anything else in that. A lot of it is with accessory structures, just like a lot of it, it really comes down to kind of the aesthetics of it. And again, a recognition of a density of land use, so to speak, in that. And obviously, as you get bigger, the ability to put more larger is always there. But the end result isn't always the fact that it's aesthetically going to be displeasing. Because on 5 acres, 3 large buildings actually looks far less than a 7,000 square foot lot with a house and a garage and a small building on it in that. So, and I just wanted to point out, because the gentleman, Mr. Watson, it made me think, again, the height restrictions are not changing in the proposed code. So it still would be limited to 15 feet for any structure. That is not being proposed. And again, the aesthetics in the architectural requirements are not changing in that. So that's all going to remain.
Dan, I certainly understand the, larger lot issue. Do you think that when you're talking about an acre, which I about live on an acre, that unlimited size? I mean, could someone have a house and then add 3 accessory buildings and basically just have a path between all the buildings on their acre?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I mean, because again, obviously on.
I don't know that people are going to want to do that. And I
No,
know that
right.
on 2 acres.
Yeah.
I just wonder if the 1 acre is a bit small to be that lenient with land coverage.
Yeah.
You know, like if you're living on an acreage and the guy next door has an acre and then, he builds his house and then he builds 3 accessory buildings that pretty much cover his whole backyard, that would, I guess my question is 1 acre the appropriate place to start?
Yeah, and-
Could it be
and-
an acre and a half or
Yeah, and like I said.
without restriction?
No,
I mean,
I-
I can see how 3 acres or 2 acres, 5 acres, that's not an issue. But if you're talking about something as small as an acre and allowing someone to have 3 large accessory buildings behind their house,
And it would be.
I want to keep that from being able to happen.
Yeah.
Well, you'd want to look at say an acre lot. There's a lot of people that come to town that some of them are going to retire.
Right.
They're going to live on 3/4 of an acre. Some of them want to downsize a house. So they want 1,600 square feet, but some of them want a 2,500 square foot garage to work with.
Right.
So if you look at something that's 1 acre, then you might want to have it to where you can have no more than 1 3,000 square foot building outside your house, or 1 2,500 square foot building, depends on what it is. Because you could load an acre down with buildings with this 3 structures, especially if you're no more than 850 square feet, so you're putting in, if it's less than an acre, but you could overload an acre with a building
Right.
outside.
Yeah,
Or
and
3 buildings.
And again, I think maybe to try to answer your question in that, like I said, I guess from a land use standpoint and a traditional planning standpoint, 1 acre is kind of that magic number in that, because even on 1 acre in a lot of codes, like I was saying in my introduction, is also when you can still, even in a single family residential aspect, a lot of codes still allow animal privileges, horses, cattle, and again, there's restrictions. But again, 1 acre always seems to be that point at which some of those are allowed, and so you have 1 acre and above, and under an acre type of things. But it's not to say that from our code or our aspect that has to be the cutoff line. It could be higher in that, because again, anytime we're looking at codes, and even when I drafted these codes and have any of that, I honestly look at the aspect of what is going to be the best benefit to the majority of the community. What's going to be best for the community? What's good for Guthrie? Because we can go all day about, this city has this, that city has that, and some of it could be, looked at for here, others, but at the end of the day, is this going to be good for Guthrie and its residents in that? And so, like I said, it's kind of a starting point. If the commission feels that, that's too lenient, I guess, it could be 2 acres, it could be 1.5, it could be, I will say again that if you go above 1 acre, it does take a significant portion of properties out of that equation, and that because the good majority of them down south are an acre, and you start to get probably the minority at 1.5 to 3 acres in that. But again, that's again up to you guys. There's that, and like I said, I in some cases, kind of going back to what Mr. Bryant had indicated is, I guess if you're looking at, how you want to look at it, if you're looking purely at aesthetics, a lot of times, again, just by nature, the larger the lots, the aesthetics in some cases don't always come into play because you have large properties, and so they're spread out more, and again, you have much greater distance between property owners. So a 2,600 square foot structure on a 1 acre property that's 50 feet from you is going to look probably not that bad or smaller than one that's 5 feet off your property line that's only maybe 800 square feet. So again, just things to think about or take into consideration.
Well, and, sorry, I was gonna say, on the properties that are 1 acre and larger, it's up to 3 accessories, but that does not include the detached garage.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, yeah. And like I said, the basic behind that is I don't think a property should be penalized per se for having to do mandatory requirements, because again, our code does not say it has to be an attached garage or a detached garage. It just says you have to have a garage, you know, and again, the proposal is to go down to 1 in that. But again, I don't think it's fair to a property owner that, you know, you in essence be penalized for something that you mandatorily have to put in.
Another question that I have, if some of these acreages, properties out there, some gentleman saying has a 5 acres, but that 5 acres could be consisted of 4 acre and a quarter.
Yes.
So how are you gonna treat that, or they gonna treat it?
Well, no, yeah, that's why-
Or they treat it as a whole?
No, right, like I said, at this point, you know, the cutoff is an acre. So if you're, you know, 43,550 square feet, you're under an acre. So you're going to be under the other ones. If you're 43,563 square feet, you're over an acre, you're going to be on the other ones. So right now, it's a pretty clear cutoff, because there aren't exceptions to say, well, plus or minus, you know, 200 square feet or 1,000 square feet or whatever. So again, whether it's 1 acre, 10 acres, 5 acres, you're on this. If you're under an acre, whether you're 7,000 square feet or, you know, a couple hundred square feet under an acre, you're under these. Especially on larger lots, obviously, you know, the lot coverage is the same, 25%, but if you have 2 acres, you have a much larger acreage to get to that 25% versus a 7,000 square foot lot or a 10,000 square foot lot. So, you know, you theoretically could have somebody that would put 10 or 12 200 square foot structures on their property. And I agree, I don't think that's something that we as a community will want, but you never know, you know, people could do that. So that's why I was saying, I think putting a maximum number of accessory structures, period, helps to take care of probably some of that concern that you're gonna have too many structures or that and that, so you have that as a limitation more so than lot coverage, because again, the smaller lots kind of take care of themselves with lot coverage, to be honest with you, in that, because, again, even with the 2-stall garage, we're having people having a hard time trying to build a house in a garage and meet the lot coverage, let alone accessory structure, so.
I think we have someone who'd like to speak. Is that right? No? Oh, okay.
If you could come up, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Name
We just
and
need to
address
have
for
it
the
on the
record.
record, thank you.
My name's Debbie, and I think personally, I would rather see a big building than all the cars in the yard. And 5 acres is a lot.
It's a lot.
So, I mean, it's a lot to me. And I think you should be able to feel what you want.
Thank you. With the potential concern about, in the lake area, about blocking someone's view of the lake, would our current and proposed height requirements or height limitations address that? And what do we do? Is that a consideration in the lake area?
Well, you know, it's interesting you bring that up, because I come from one of my jobs was in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. It's a well-known lake community. And there, every aspect of building was, you're blocking my view, you're blocking my view. There were no ordinances in place, and there was nothing that we could clearly regulate view. It became a consideration in some aspects, and that's why even the original zoning was limited in height for structures and that. But that's the thing, with our current code, we have nothing that would allow us to tell somebody, you can't build that because it blocks the neighbor's view. And I can tell you in general, that is a very, very difficult aspect to try to put in a code and regulate.
Yeah.
I can tell you that probably 99.9 times out of 10, it would go to some type of legal litigation, because it's nearly impossible. And that's why if you look at that aspect, you try to do it with pier building height to make sure that you don't have 30 feet of building height or whatever. And again, with these accessory structures, as I indicated, the proposed height that is in the current code is not changing. It's still limited to 15 feet in that. So, you know, is there going to be a case where maybe a particular neighbor has a view and to some extent it gets blocked? Yes, but again, it could be with a primary structure too, or any structure on there in that. So, again, you know, it's an impossibility to try to regulate, I guess.
You've been there, done that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, honestly, and I can tell you from
Well,
experience,
and I would
yeah.
tell you from the legal side of it,
Yeah.
that would be a nightmare.
It would,
Because
yes.
you're getting into litigating a subjective view of
Yep.
what, you know, one person might like looking at the street, person might looking out the
Yep.
window. So it's a really slippery slope
Yep.
on which view we're
Yeah.
gonna take as being, you know, the right one. So
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Okay, any other comments from the commission? What kind of, go ahead.
Oh, about the accessory buildings?
Or
about
any of it.
anything.
Yeah, because, just to kind of recap, Joe, because I'm sure you read over the
Oh,
staff.
I read it, and
Yeah.
I want to say I was very impressed.
Oh, okay, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as I indicated, like on the design standards, the biggest thing was the incorporation of a new overlay for the Guthrie overlay district, and that, I think that's a very important part and going to add a great value to the community because we get to protect those areas and those homes. But that's why I wasn't going to go too far, because I figured that you know, probably read over it, so.
I did have a question
Yes.
about the Guthrie proper overlay
Yes.
district.
Yes.
Now, is this is new?
Yes, because that's why I was saying, that would be a newly created overlay, and it would pertain to the section that is called the Guthrie Proper Overlay District. And that would be the one that would require that any existing home be maintained or even a new home be built in a Victorian colonial bungalow type style home in that. So it would be compatible with what you have in the area. Because again, one of the things that we don't have in our code that has a lot of strong, or that has any really teeth, is if somebody even on a vacant lot in that area, if they wanted to build, they could build a very basic, and nothing wrong with these type of homes, a ranch style or a more modern subdivision home. I'm just not sure that that's what we want as a community and would be appropriate for that area. It has its purpose in other parts of the community, and there's nothing wrong with that type of housing. But I think we need to protect that area just like we're protecting the historic district area with the buildings down there.
Well, I guess then my question becomes on this, the accessory building.
Yes?
Is that still, is this accessory building still with the old overlay?
Yes.
Okay.
That is not changing.
So
Yeah.
the Noble district boundary, the division district
Yep,
boundary?
they're all in place and those are not
The
changing. Just like
Midtown-
you see up there, those are.
So that's only for house.
That's
Right.
residential
Housing.
only.
Right,
Okay.
housing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the same thing, if you happen to be in that area and you're not in the overlay there for accessory buildings, you would have the opportunity to have, you know, you'd be under that. But that is not changing. That, like I said, is still part of it and would only apply to the
And I guess I was
accessory.
concerned because my neighborhood's left out of the
Well,
Guthrie proper overlay
and, you know,
district.
and I should have mentioned with with.
And it's probably in here, but it was a lot of information.
No, yeah, I know, and I'm you know, it's always one of those things, I want to try to provide as much as I can, but not overdo. But I should mention, if the commission feels that there's other areas that should be included in that overlay taken away, that is, again, completely on the board. What I tried to do was look at an actual, you know, on the ground, how is it built right now type of aspect
Yeah, and-
to where most of them exist. Because again.
You have some ranch
as-
style houses.
Yeah, because that's it, as you
Yeah, and
get
it's
north.
obviously that you looked.
Yeah, because as you get
Yeah.
north of College in that, off of Walnut, you know, most
Yeah.
of those are more of the modern ranch style in that. And even in and around Park Place and that on the outer part, they're more the ranch style
Yeah.
in that. So again, I did not put that in there in that, but again, if you think we missed an area or you want to include an area, you know, have at it,
No.
because right now it's a proposal and is not in.
My neighborhood's pretty eclectic, but I
Yeah.
do know that they didn't want, you know, large metal buildings.
Yeah, and that would still,
That's
like I
still
said,
there.
those overlays are still in place, and there's no proposed changes to those at all. And that's why I said the overall architectural requirements are not changing.
All right, what kind of motion do you need from us on this?
Well, if you're happy with all of it, you can just make a motion to basically approve it all. If there's elements that you want changed or that, let me know, and the motion can be considered with some changes or what in that. But, you know, the agenda item is as a whole, and the proposed amendment would incorporate everything that we talked about.
The question that I still have on the accessory
Yeah.
buildings on the acreage.
Uh-huh.
I mean, would you telling me that you can have 3 structures, but you cannot have one larger structure?
No. What I'm saying is, on 1 acre or more, there's no limitation on the structure
structure.
size.
You can-
The only limitation is the total number. So if somebody on a 1 acre property wanted to build 3 2,600 square foot buildings, theoretically you could, as long as it doesn't exceed lot coverage and, you know, you meet setbacks in that. Again, the limitation would be purely numbers. When you get under an acre, not only do you have a number limitation, but even the individual size of any one cannot exceed 850 square feet.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing that, in all of this,
Yeah.
and it's a massive amount of
Yes.
stuff, and a lot of things that I think that have been talked about way before you got here.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that you're addressing.
Well, thank you.
But I remember when we approved the woven wire fence with
Yes.
the wood. My concern is that when we approved that, we approved a very specific looking fence. And if you add masonry or brick posts or supports to that, that woven wire thing, then you're getting a look that is not what is.
Oh, and that, you know, again, from, you know, staff standpoint, that's fine. If you want to limit it strictly to wood, that's fine.
Because that was a
Yeah.
specific kind of.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was just, you know, once again, always one of
Now,
those things.
they can build a wood masonry
Yeah.
brick fence, but they shouldn't combine it with that woven
Yeah, and
wire.
that's fine, is that we could just basically say only incorporated with, you know, the wood post supports and take out the masonry or brick. Is that,
Yes.
oh, yeah, is that a desire of the commission as a whole? Yeah, that's all right, I just want to make sure everybody's.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess that could be a part of the motion.
yeah, that could be, yeah.
So does this go on to council, or is this a?
Yes,
Okay.
if you guys approve it tonight, yes, it would go to the first city council meeting in April, which offhand, I forget the date, I'm sorry, it's the first Tuesday, but it would go there. If they concur with your recommendation or don't have any changes, or even if they do, if they decide to adopt the ordinance that night, then it would go into effect 30 days after that, so then basically it'd be effective the beginning of May, or middle of May roughly.
I'm going to bring up one other thing
Sure.
about fences.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that if I'm just reading this wrong, but it's on the barbed wire. Okay?
Yeah?
And this is in commercial commercial and industrial districts.
Yes?
And then it goes down here on F, barbed wire and electric fences in all districts except agriculture districts. Is that not contradictory, or am I just reading it wrong?
No, actually, you know, I didn't even,
It is, no, it's contradictory.
it is, I didn't even know, and you know, the funny thing is, that's part of the existing code. Because the only part of the fences that I really changed was the opacity of the fences and
Which
then
I think-
adding the other. So actually, you know, that's good that you mentioned that, because it should be, oh no, hold on. Yeah, it should be, basically, we only want that in the ag districts. We don't want it in the other districts.
Or industrial?
Yeah, or industrial, right.
Industrial.
Right, and that's why I was saying I'll reword that so it states. that we-
Commercial, industrial,
Yeah.
and agri.
Right, and that it would be prohibited in everywhere else. But
Yeah.
you're right, it actually doesn't read that. Yeah,
We are permitted in industrial, is that right?
yes, because industrial and then ag, you can have the taller fences, not only the barbed wire, but you can actually have taller fences
Or say
too.
if we don't, I'm in violation.
Because you can actually go up to, I think it's 10 feet, 8 feet.
8 feet.
No, 10 feet in the industrial, yeah.
And then the bar.
Yeah,
on top.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, so. But I will make note of that, to make sure that gets changed.
With that, we could entertain a motion to approve with those changes, if that's your pleasure, or we could take more time to review it.
Well, I would make a motion to approve with the recommendation on the fence.
Right, to take
Fence
out
changes.
masonry and brick on the
And then-
wood and wire, yeah,
Yeah,
and then change
Just the
the,
adjustment on the.
yeah, okay.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by,
I'll second.
okay. All right, roll call vote. Abe Gassenpour,
Aye.
Don McBride,
Yes.
Jill Oaks Tons,
Yes.
Joe Chappell,
Yes.
Chris Bryant.
Yes.
All right, 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. And ladies, sorry.
They used to it.
All right, staff comments.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add again is, you know, again, I appreciate the commission's comments and again, due diligence, I guess, on the review of that. Again, I'm going to set forth somewhat of a schedule to try to bring some of the other elements. So again, hopefully by the end of the year, we can have a fully updated zoning code in that again, I think is going to be a benefit to the community and help the community because again, we have some areas that unfortunately are more of a detriment to the average person than it is helpful in that. And so, you know, and again, we want to make sure that we have that on both ends, that we as a community get what, you know, a certain product in some things, but again, we don't want to be so prohibitive in that. Because even with the accessory structures, honestly, I had probably at least three, possibly four people that went to the county because they couldn't build in the city in that. And I, you know, and that's their prerogative, but it's some of those things that, again, we need to look at and understand as a community and try to move forward and, you know, everybody gets on board. Because, again, at the end of the day, you know, we all live in this community and we have certain things that we want and desire. And again, we need to look at it as Guthrie and not, you know, hey, try to be like Edmond or somewhere else. So anyway, I've spoken plenty tonight, so thank you.
All right, commission comments?
Thank you.
Commission comments, we'll start with Don.
I just appreciate his hard work.
Wash your hands. Yeah.
That's right. Public service announcement. Yes, thank you, Dan and staff for all of your hard work with this. It really made our job a lot easier than having to hash over it over several meetings. And I think it's going to protect and preserve, you know, the historical nature of Guthrie proper, but then also allow you all on the outskirts to have more freedom and ability to do what you need to do as well. And that's all I have.
Well, I just want to give kudos to Dan for this because, in fact, I shared this with our one of our former city planners, Renee Spinato, and she read through it, and when she called me, she said, "Gosh, I wanted to do a lot of that stuff, but I never found the time." And she talked about the inconsistencies and so I just want to, on behalf of the community, thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
And I want to welcome
Oh, yes,
Jill
I'm
Thompson.
sorry.
Welcome, Jill.
Yes, I was going to say.
To the planning
Yes.
commission.
Yes.
Thank you. No, it's very impressive and, it certainly made it easier to understand, especially for me being new, to go through it and figure out.
And you know,
what
it's
we're doing,
usually
but-
not this complicated.
Oh, exactly.
I mean, great first meeting.
Yeah, no,
Well-
it was very impressive. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks.
All right, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming.